They thought your downfall in silence, believing you would never notice the game behind the shadows. But every move they made was recorded by fate, and every step they designed for you became the very path that lifted you higher than they ever imagined. Now, the same plan they built to break you is the reason they stand confused, watching your rise turn into their regret, because what they intended as your ending was only the beginning of your real power awakening in silence and unstoppable momentum. Today, truth speaks louder than their plans, and they cannot escape it now. They built a plan in silence, believing it would be enough to stop your progress before it even began. But what they never understood was that every hidden intention carries its own weakness, and every strategy rooted in negativity eventually collapses under its own weight. At first, it looked like you were the one losing ground, as situations didn't move in your favor and obstacles appeared at every step. But behind the surface, something very different was happening. You were learning, adapting, and quietly strengthening parts of yourself that they could never see or measure. Every attempt they made to block you only forced you to develop new ways of thinking, new levels of patience, and a deeper understanding of how pressure can transform a person instead of destroying them. What they thought would confuse you actually clarified your vision, and what they believed would weaken your confidence ended up sharpening your focus. The irony is that their plan depended on your reaction, but you chose not to react in the way they expected. That silence became your advantage, because while they were busy assuming your downfall, you were busy building your foundation in ways that could not be interrupted. Slowly, the same moves they thought were working against you started to lose their power, because you were no longer the same person they originally targeted. You had already evolved beyond the version of you they tried to trap. Every delay they caused became time you used to improve your mindset, your discipline, and your ability to stay calm when things didn't make sense. And without realizing it, they gave you the exact environment you needed to grow stronger than before. Their confidence in their plan turned into overconfidence, and that overconfidence became the crack where everything started to fall apart. What they didn't anticipate was resilience, the kind that doesn't show itself immediately but builds quietly until it becomes undeniable. So when their plan finally reached its peak, expecting to see you broken or stuck, they were met with something completely different. Instead of collapse, they saw elevation. Instead of defeat, they saw progress. Instead of confusion in you, they found confusion in themselves. Because the truth is simple, when someone tries to control your path, they unknowingly become part of your transformation. Their hidden plan didn't break you, it refined you, and in trying to end your story early, they accidentally made sure it would become stronger, louder, and impossible to ignore. Every setback you faced was never just a random obstacle, even though at that moment it felt like everything was falling apart without reason or fairness. Each moment of delay and unexpected difficulty was quietly shaping something within you that could not have been formed through comfort or ease. When things didn't go your way, it forced you to look deeper into yourself, to find answers you never thought you needed, and to develop strength in areas you didn't even know were weak. What seemed like a stop in your progress was actually a redirection toward a stronger version of yourself, even if you couldn't see it at the time. Millions. There were moments when you questioned your direction, moments when effort didn't bring results and silence followed your hardest work. But in that silence, something important was happening. You were learning patience without even realizing it. learning how to continue even when motivation fades and results are not immediate. Each setback removed a layer of dependency on instant success and replaced it with endurance. Slowly, you stopped measuring progress only by outcomes and started building discipline that didn't depend on external validation. Cleanse, every time you were pushed back, you didn't just return to the same place. You returned with more awareness. You began to notice patterns, understand people better, and recognize which paths were not meant for you. That understanding itself became a form of strength because it prevented you from repeating the same mistakes. What once confused you started becoming clear through experience, and clarity is one of the strongest forms of power a person can develop. Mend. Even emotionally, the setbacks played a role in shaping resilience. There were moments of doubt, frustration, and pressure, but instead of breaking you completely, they trained your mind to stay steady under uncertainty. You learned how to carry weight without letting it define your identity. You stopped seeing failure as an identity and started seeing it as a temporary condition. That shift alone changed the way you respond to challenges, because now nothing feels permanent except your ability to adapt. Gleaned over time, what once felt like rejection became protection. What once felt like loss became redirection. You started to realize that some doors closing were not punishments, but filters guiding you away from what would not support your growth. And every time you survived something difficult, you didn't come out the same. You came out more aware, more focused, and more prepared for what was ahead. Learned as the strength built through setbacks is not loud at first. It doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly in your decisions, in your reactions, in the way you now handle pressure differently than before. You became someone who doesn't collapse at the first sign of difficulty, but instead observes, adjusts, and continues forward. That transformation didn't happen in comfort, it happened in the very moments that once felt like failure. And now, even if the same challenges appear again, they cannot affect you the way they used to, because you are no longer the same person who first faced them. What they designed as your failure became your upgrade in ways they never calculated and never understood, because their entire plan was based on the assumption that pressure would break you instead of building you. They carefully shaped situations meant to slow you down, confuse your direction, and make you question your own decisions, believing that repeated obstacles would eventually drain your energy and confidence. But what they didn't realize is that the human mind, when pushed under pressure, does not always collapse. It evolves. And in your case, every intended failure became a hidden lesson that upgraded your thinking, your awareness, and your strength. Dawned at the beginning, it may have looked like things were going against you from every direction, as if progress had suddenly stopped and nothing was aligning the way it should. But behind that surface, something deeper was happening. You were being forced to think differently, to slow down and observe more carefully, to understand patterns that you would have ignored if everything had been easy. Each situation they created to make you stumble ended up giving you insight, because struggle forces clarity in a way comfort never can. You started noticing what actually matters, what drains your energy, and what deserves your focus. Being their design was meant to limit you, but it ended up expanding your capacity. Where they expected confusion, you developed awareness. Where they expected hesitation, you've developed patience. And where they expected emotional collapse, you developed control. Slowly, the same conditions meant to weaken you began to train you without you even realizing it. You were learning how to operate under pressure, how to stay steady when outcomes were uncertain, and how to continue moving even when progress felt invisible. Mounds, every setback they orchestrated, carried within it an opportunity for adaptation. You began to adjust your approach, refine your mindset, and eliminate weaknesses you might never have noticed otherwise. Instead of repeating the same reactions, you started evolving your responses. That evolution is what turned their failure plan into your personal upgrade system. The more they pushed, the more refined you became, like pressure shaping something stronger rather than breaking it apart. Lend over time, the difference between who you were before and who you were becoming grew clearer. You were no longer reacting emotionally to every challenge. You were analyzing, understanding, and responding with intention. That shift alone marked a transformation they never expected. Their idea of failure depends on stagnation, but you didn't stay in one place. You kept moving, even if slowly, even if silently, and that movement turned every setback into progress. Lens, what they intended as a final outcome for you, became the foundation of your resilience. Instead of ending your momentum, it created a version of you that could no longer be easily shaken. You stopped seeing obstacles as endings and started seeing them as processes that refine strength. That change in perception is what turned their entire strategy upside down. And in the end, their design didn't define your limits. It revealed your capacity to grow beyond them. What was supposed to be your failure became the very system that upgraded your mindset, your discipline, and your ability to rise each time something tried to push you down, until even their own plan became proof of your transformation. Silence protected you in ways they never understood, because while they were busy speaking, planning, and revealing their intentions through actions and assumptions, you were choosing not to react in the way they expected. That silence was not weakness or confusion. It was awareness. It was the decision to observe instead of respond, to understand instead of engage, and to let time reveal what words never could. While they believed your silence meant you were unaware or affected, it was actually the space where you gathered clarity and protected your focus from unnecessary disruption. Mlenges, every time they tried to provoke a reaction, expecting you to respond emotionally or impulsively, they were unknowingly exposing more about themselves than about you. Their words, their behavior, and their hidden patterns started becoming clearer because silence has a way of letting people reveal their true nature. When you don't interrupt or argue, people often continue until their real intentions become visible. And that is exactly what happened. While you remained quiet, they kept talking, acting, and making decisions that slowly uncovered what they were really thinking and trying to achieve. Menja's silence gave you distance, and distance gave you perspective. From that perspective, you were no longer trapped inside the emotional noise of the situation. You could see patterns that were invisible when you were emotionally involved. You began to notice inconsistencies between what was said and what was done, between appearances and reality, and every contradiction they revealed became another piece of truth that worked in your favor. Without saying a word, you were collecting information simply by letting them continue. Monged, what they misunderstood was that silence is not empty. It is strategic space. It allows you to process without interference, to think without pressure, and to respond only when necessary, instead of reacting unnecessarily. In contrast, their need to speak, justify, or manipulate situations ended up revealing more than they intended. The more they tried to control perception, the more visible their intentions became. Because over-explaining, overreacting, or constantly positioning oneself often exposes insecurity, and that insecurity was something they couldn't hide forever. Your silence also protected your energy. While they were busy projecting their thoughts outward, you were conserving your attention and not wasting it on battles that didn't require immediate participation. That preservation of energy allowed you to stay grounded while they became increasingly exposed by their own actions. You didn't need to chase truth. You simply allowed truth to surface on its own. And over time, the contrast became obvious. Their behavior became louder, more revealing, while your silence became stronger and more controlled. And in that imbalance, clarity formed naturally. People often reveal their true intentions when they believe they are not being judged or challenged. Silence created exactly that environment. Without pressure, they continued speaking through actions, and those actions told a story they never intended to tell. In the end, silence was not absence. It was protection combined with intelligence. It shielded you from unnecessary conflict while allowing reality to expose itself without distortion. And what they thought was your lack of response was actually your strongest position, because while they were busy revealing themselves, you were simply watching everything unfold with complete clarity. Your patience turned their strategy into a mistake, because everything they planned was built on the assumption that you would react quickly and without control. They expected pressure to push you into decisions they could predict, mistakes they could use, and reactions that would place you exactly where they wanted you to be. Their entire approach depended on urgency, confusion, and the belief that time would work against you. But what they didn't anticipate was your ability to slow everything down, to absorb pressure without breaking, and to allow situations to unfold without rushing into their trap. And at first, your patience may have looked like delay or hesitation to them. They mistook your calmness for uncertainty and your silence for weakness. They believed that if they kept applying pressure, eventually you would lose control or respond in a way that confirmed their expectations. But patience changes the entire structure of a situation. When you refuse to react instantly, you remove the power from manipulation. Because manipulation depends on timing and emotional reaction. Without immediate response, their strategy began to lose its effectiveness. And every move they made required a reaction to complete its purpose. But instead of giving them that reaction, you allowed space between their actions and your response. That space created confusion in their plan, because they could no longer predict your behavior. They were used to controlling the rhythm of events, but your patience disrupted that rhythm completely. And once control of timing is lost, even the strongest strategies start to weaken. While they were expecting frustration to push you into errors, you were using patience to understand the situation more deeply. Instead of reacting to surface-level pressure, you were observing patterns, studying behavior, and recognizing intentions behind actions. That awareness allowed you to respond only when necessary, not when triggered. And that difference alone changed the outcome of everything they were trying to achieve. Their strategy relied on urgency, but your patience created delay in their advantage. They wanted fast decisions. You gave them none. They wanted emotional reactions. You gave them control over your emotions. They wanted predictable responses. You gave them unpredictability through calmness. And slowly, what was supposed to be a controlled situation for them became uncertain and unstable. Over time, their frustration increased because patience does something powerful. It forces others to reveal their own impatience. When someone cannot control your timing, they begin to expose their own desperation. And that is exactly what happened. Their attempts became more obvious, their pressure more visible, and their intentions harder to hide. Instead of trapping you, They started revealing themselves through their own urgency. Lemdia's your patience also gave you clarity that they never had. While they were focused on forcing outcomes, you were focused on understanding them. That understanding allowed you to see weaknesses in their approach that they could not see themselves. And once you understand the structure of someone's strategy, it becomes easier to avoid its impact entirely. You no longer walk into traps when you can see how they are built. And the more they pushed, the more your patience turned into a shield. It protected you from reacting in ways that could be used against you. And in avoiding those reactions, you denied them the results they were depending on. Without emotional leverage, their strategy slowly lost its power. Once in the end, patience did not just help you survive their plan, it reversed its direction. What was designed to control your outcome became a reflection of their own miscalculation. Because when someone cannot rush your mind, they cannot control your decisions, and when they cannot control your decisions, their entire strategy collapses under its own impatience. Now your rise is the proof of their miscalculation, because everything they believed would hold you back ended up becoming the exact reason you moved forward. Stronger, sharper, and more aware than before. They calculated your limits based on assumptions, not understanding your capacity to adapt under pressure, and they underestimated how every challenge placed in your path would not slow you down, but refine you. What they thought would define your ending actually became the beginning of a transformation they never saw coming. And now your progress stands as a silent confirmation that their entire judgment was wrong from the start. Rebellions at the time, they were convinced that their actions would shape your outcome. They believed that by creating obstacles, confusion, or resistance, they could determine how far you would go, or how quickly you would fall. But they overlooked one critical factor: your ability to evolve in the middle of pressure. Instead of staying in one version of yourself, you kept upgrading mentally, emotionally, and strategically with every experience. Each attempt to limit you became a reason for you to expand your thinking and refine your approach. And that evolution is what turned their prediction into failure. Your rise is not loud luck or random success. It is structured growth built on every moment they thought would stop you. While they were focused on controlling your direction, you were learning how to navigate through uncertainty. While they were trying to define your outcome, you were developing the ability to redefine yourself again and again. That difference is what created the gap between their expectation and your reality. They saw a fixed version of you, but life revealed a version of you that kept adapting beyond their understanding. Small in every setback they expected to weaken you, instead contributed to your awareness. You started recognizing patterns and identifying which challenges were meant to distract you and which were meant to develop you. That clarity became a powerful advantage, because once you understand the nature of obstacles, they lose their ability to control your direction. And slowly, what was supposed to be your limitation became your learning system. Balance, their miscalculation was not just about underestimating your strength. It was about misunderstanding your response to adversity. They assumed pressure would produce collapse, but in your case, pressure produced focus. They assumed resistance would create confusion, but instead it created discipline. They assumed obstacles would delay your progress, but instead those very obstacles forced you to build stronger foundations. Every expectation they had was reversed through your response. As you continued moving forward, your growth became undeniable. Not because everything became easy, but because you learned how to move even when things were difficult. That ability to continue despite resistance is what defines real rise. And now looking at your progress, it becomes clear that their influence did not restrict you, it contributed to your development in ways they never intended. Even their attempts to control outcomes ended up exposing their limitations. Because when someone tries to predict your collapse and instead witnesses your progress, it highlights the gap between assumption and reality. Your rise carries within it every misjudgment they made, every expectation they failed to meet, and every outcome they failed to control. It is not just success. It is evidence that their understanding of you was incomplete. Over time, the contrast became obvious. While they remained stuck in their assumptions, you moved beyond them. While they were focused on controlling your path, you were focused on walking it. And that movement forward, despite everything designed to hold you back, is what turned their strategy into a miscalculation that cannot be corrected. Now your rise stands on its own, not as something granted or predicted, but as something built through persistence, adaptation, and silent resilience. And in that rise, every wrong assumption they made is already answered without words, because reality itself became the proof that their calculation was never accurate in the first place.